Welcome to Illuminati Silver. We tell you the truth about silver. Today is Sunday, the 11th of February 2024. And we're not talking about silver in this video. I've had the opportunity to conduct a podcast with my old friend Greg. And the subject we really wanted to cover today was the condition of King Charles, who has been diagnosed as suffering from cancer. And Greg has approximately 25 to 27 years experience of he himself having suffered from multiple cancers. So whilst this is not a medical interview and should not be regarded as such, it is interesting to understand the process that King Charles has probably gone through and Greg's best guess prognosis as to which cancer he is actually suffering from. So without further ado, let's go over to our discussion. Well. Good afternoon, Greg. It's been quite a while. How have you been? What's new in the world of Greg?
Hi, Richard. Since we last did a podcast, me wandering around having had cancer start in 1997, it seems to have become quite fashionable with our king. Probably one of the problems I have had. As you will know, just briefly, I'm 78, so that makes me, I think it's 4 years older than the king. And as you know, bringing up parents is quite hard work since your mother is in her 80s. I trust she is okay, having, I understand, had a fall this morning. You're going to have to tell her to put more water in her drinks.
Well, she does like her gin, but I have to say she's 90 this year, not 80. So it's telling times. And the reason for the podcast is because of King Charles. As we know, he's recently undergone a prostate medical procedure, during which time he has announced, at least, that he's been diagnosed as having cancer. So, Greg, with someone who's battled with cancer for what, probably 25, 27 years, can you explain to our audience basically what the background is, what has happened, and perhaps maybe throw some light as to what type of cancer, because it hasn't been announced, you think he may have?
There are many people who, having had a prostate diagnosis of any sort, they mysteriously discover brain cancer. Now, I'm not overly impressed by some of Charles's opinions, but I don't think the two are quite that closely linked. He was diagnosed with benign prostate enlargement, known as BPE. He went into hospital for a simple procedure. I've actually had that procedure 4 or 5 times. It is called a TURP, transurethral prostate resection, or resection of the prostate. That means that they have the good fortune to have an inspection panel, which means you don't actually have to cut through body tissue to get to the prostate. They insert a tube into the bladder, or less likely into the rectum, and they then cut open the prostate just with a tiny little cut, and basically they break up the prostate and then use a vacuum system to suck out the excess prostate they have cut away. The prostate has 3 main sectors that surround the urethra, which passes through the middle of it, and it should look like a walnut and be about that size. But in men of a certain age, the prostate starts to enlarge. One of the nodes on mine was as large as a little bit larger than your thumb, and it was growing into the bladder, so they removed that. And I went home the same afternoon. I drove myself in and I drove myself home. when you're having these procedures, they really don't hurt because you're looking at a fairly enlargeable tube through which they put a laparoscope, which is the instrument used for the procedure. I've always said of anything that's being done with the bladder through that particular inspection panel, it's as easy as shelling peas. It's only afterwards for a couple of days, it's a bit like peeing shells.
Which I assume is very painful, Greg.
No.
No?
That tube is like all such tubes, it's very elastic. The prostate acts as something of a sphincter muscle to regulate the outflow from the bladder. It's a tube that you can stick something about the size of a big ballpoint pen through and virtually not feel it.
Okay, so that's the prostate. How by examining that will they have discovered he's got cancer? And what is your sort of best guess as to what he may very well have?
I'm not going to guess at what he may have. I'm going to merely run through some of the cancers that it could be, on the principle that he doesn't want to announce which one it is. And I think he's quite right not to, because that means that all men of a certain age will be paying attention. And the more he can do to get people to go to their doctor and have their prostate checked over about the age of 50, the better, because you've got the whole of the urological or urine tract from the kidneys to the outside world that can be inspected as part of the job. You're doing a PSA, prostate-specific antigen test on the blood, which tells you the condition of the prostate, indicates, it does not tell you, it indicates if there is cancer present or if there is a major problem going on, because your PSA will escalate if there is a major problem, because the prostate will be putting out more of the hormones that it is there and designed to produce. So they will have been, let's assume they were in there via the bladder. They will also, at that time, remove the excess prostate, or what they consider to be excess, and that can go as far as a total radical removal of the prostate. I do not believe this is what he has had. He would be far less immediately well. So I presume he has had a transurethral resection of the prostate, which is removal of part of it. While in the bladder, they will do two things. They will look at the whole of the bladder wall internally to see if it looks healthy. If there is anything looking a little odd, while they're cleaning up from the debris internally from the minor procedure on the prostate, where they close the hole, I always refer to it as meat welding, which probably isn't too delicate, but what they do is they use a hot wire and they join the two sections they have cut through together by actually heating them to the point where they actually form a scar or cicatrice between them, and the scab on top of that protects the healing join in this little pocket of the prostate. All of the debris is gathered up in a little, believe it or not, a little net bag, and it can be removed easily through the laparoscopic instrument. We are looking at instruments with blades and tools on that are about 2, maybe 3 millimeters across. So it's working on, the surgeon will be working on a high magnification, probably on a 24 to 26 inch television screen, and he will do the operation looking at that, and that will be picking up a camera image of what he's doing inside the bladder. When looking at the wall of the bladder, you may well see little abnormalities. These might be cancerous. All too often, they are referred to as polyps, because that tends not to, shall we say, frighten the horses. You haven't actually used the cancer word. However, you may also say that it's a little bit more than more noticeable. And so you remove those, you gather them with care within the bladder, and they are sent together with the tissue, well, separately, but together with the tissue from the prostate they have dealt with. They are sent to the laboratory for analysis. One guess is that they've come back as being cancerous. That does not mean they are as such a cancer, though it can do. You have surface cancerous tissue, which they will have removed in the knowledge that it shouldn't be there, but that it needs removal and it needs checking to see if it is cancerous, and if it is, what type of cancer. These little developments occur and look a little bit like tiny weeny groups of mushrooms growing. Now, I've had, I think offhand, since 2001, somewhere in the region of 14 procedures for bladder cancer. And all that they do is they wave this tube around. I always ask to watch it on the television screen, so they give me another screen to watch. And I can see what is going on, because I'm one of those control freaks who wants to know what is the state of my health and what am I actually fighting. Once it's removed, they heal by virtue of, as I said earlier, meat welding, i.e. a light burn on either side of the join they're making to create a join between the two areas of tissue. The next, more serious version of that type of cancerous tissue is CIS, C for Charlie. So that's cancer in situ. That is when the cancer is now developed further and is attacking the bladder wall, not just growing on the inner surface of the bladder wall. That is putting, for lack of a better word, a rooting system into the bladder wall. Over time, if not treated, not discovered and not treated, that will produce a tumor in the bladder wall, or on the inside of it, or on the outside of it, in the abdomen. The next stage is that tumor will begin to set up its own blood supply. Once it has set up its own blood supply, it is likely to continue to grow rather faster. And when you take full-blown tumors, they frequently have a very, very good blood supply. One of the drawbacks of another cancer which I have had, which is renal cell carcinoma, is in the kidney, and the kidney is an organ about the size of your clenched fist. You normally have two of them, one on either side of the vena cava and the aorta, about the level of the bottom of your rib cage. And because the kidneys are filtering blood, they are continuously engorged with blood, which they take out of the one blood vessel, filter, and put back into the other. And they process all of your blood in your body, which is a guesstimate about 8 pints, several times a day. They are removing debris and dead tissue from your blood supply, and they're removing what is called urea, which is dead tissue and chemicals from the blood supply that should not be there. This includes dead white blood cells, dead red blood cells, which the human body is continuously producing as they fight minor infections and patrol the blood system for any possibility of infection.
So on that note, Greg, bearing in mind King Charles has left hospital, it's very unlikely then, I would assume, that he's got kidney cancer if it requires that high level, a degree of treatment. So
I would agree with you. But that is a possibility. It is likely to be a urological cancer of some sort. There are 2 others that are possibilities. One is the plumbing from the kidney to the bladder, and the other is some sort of growth that they've discovered is cancerous in the tube from the bladder to the outside world, through which the urea passes and is known in common parlance as urine. The other area where they may have discovered in exploring the possibilities of problems from his prostate is that they could have discovered traces of cancer in the colon. That's the part of the intestine that passes from the rectum up the left-hand side of the body to the rib cage, across the top and down the right-hand side to approximately where the appendix is. So that's a large organ. Your internal intestine tract is anything up to 30 feet long, and it's all packed away in your abdomen with the small intestine and the large intestine and the colon that process all and digest all of your food. If they have discovered traces either with the camera, seeing it on the wall, and several American presidents have had this problem, and you will recall that they were in hospital for a couple of days to have treatment for polyps, because the American legal system demands public access to the medical information of the president. That could be the other type of cancer. Now, I have numerous friends who have had bowel cancer and have lasted many years. As I said, started with kidney cancer, and it took them some little time to discover it. I started in 1997 because I really was not prepared to accept that there was a possibility that I had turned into a claret making machine, and the blood in the urine, or frank hematuria, as it's medically known, becomes noticeable, and one ends up effectively peeing what looks like claret. They investigated me for a couple of years to find out what the cause was, and eventually it was identified as my left kidney. My left kidney was removed, extensively cancerous, in September 2001.
Okay, well, on that note then, Greg, in a nutshell, basically, if one were to give the priority order or most likely order, bladder is probably at the top of the list, colon oblique bowel is secondary, and then potentially kidney cancer is probably at the lowest end or the lower end of that list.
I would guess, Richard,
Hmm,
that the reason he was last in hospital
hmm,
was for actual treatment. As I recall, it was on the Monday.
mhm.
Actual treatment, and he was in hospital for part of the day. And it is probable, in my guesstimate, that he was having chemotherapy. They will have checked all his blood results to make sure he is in fit enough health for chemotherapy. They will have probably put a needle in the back of his wrist and a cannula. That's a semi-permanent needle. And they will have taken between half an hour and 2 hours to run in a certain amount of chemotherapy.
And
Now,
that is probably the reason why he's retiring from active duty for the time being, because obviously it must be the treatment one must assume that he's receiving.
that being the treatment, that will leave him with a diminished immune system for the period during which he's having the treatment. Therefore, they will not want him to, as it has been delicately put, interface with in his public duties with the public. The other drawback of some of these treatments is that it is not good in the short term for one's bladder continency, and having a king wandering around like a 90-year-old with wet patches on his trousers isn't really a very good or edifying experience.
No, indeed. Well, Greg, thank you for sharing your experience and your view on this. I can assume, but it's only an assumption, that there is every possibility the king will recover from this, providing, of course, the treatment works. And hopefully there's no reason, unless there are complications, why he cannot be back to active duty, what, in a couple of months, would you say?
I would say at most a couple of months. What they will probably do is give him a course of chemotherapy that will be once a week, where they will check his bloods in the morning and give him chemotherapy in the afternoon and release him immediately afterwards when he will return to Sandringham. He will conduct limited meetings from Sandringham. He'll probably deal with all his red boxes, just as his mother did till the very end. One quick point on this is it is a matter of luck and common sense on the part of the patient. One thing that worries me greatly about King Charles having the treatment is when it comes to medicine, he has proved to be about as batty as a box of frogs. He, you may recall, personally sponsored a cancer clinic for alternative medicine in Bristol some years ago. A cancer clinic that achieved absolutely nothing but for cancer patients who went through that clinic, but it did mean they all died bright yellow because they'd been living on carrot juice. Now, if he goes down that road, or bearing in mind his belief in the utterly batty concept with no scientific provenance of homeopathy, where he encouraged the wasting of vast amounts of money in Bristol on a homeopathic hospital, which there is no scientific evidence it has any effect whatsoever on the medical condition. If he goes down that route, I would submit that is a selection for suicide.
Well, on that note, let's hope he doesn't go down that route. Greg, thank you so much. I appreciate you spending the time for educating us, because I am in the age where my prostate should be checked on a regular basis, and this at least has now reminded me to do so.
My pleasure. And if you need any more information, feel free to call.
Will do. Thank you so much. Well, that interview was more lengthy than I had originally planned. We didn't have time to edit it that thoroughly, so there are some gaps in between, and we apologize for that. But at least I hope you found it of some use. If you have, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, press the bell sign, and for those obviously following gold and silver, don't forget to tune in each weekend to our regular markets update. See you soon.